Hello, everyone. This is Ash and Simon, not from the Nice Game headquarters, but from our Corona retreat.
It is kind of a bunker here, underground.
In the bunker.
Yeah.
And we're bringing to you the newest episode of our Battleground era overview that we've started to make.
Yep, this is the third in the video series, so this is Era 3, and this takes us basically through the second half of the 15th century. So we're going from 1441 to 1500, and we're going to look at the new battleground which is released in this and what it does to the game.
So the new battleground in this era is the Anarch Revolt that you can see here in the middle, and it replaces the War of the Princes. And what this means, what this is thematically, is basically a consequence of another battleground that we've introduced in the last era, the Inquisition. Because in the Inquisition, remember, we're sacrificing our vampires and others' vampires for our own gain to satisfy the mortals who are just finding out about vampires and trying to hunt them. And now the Anarch Revolt is basically the counter push to that.
So what do we see on the battlegrounds? We have these four regions. Again, the four colors that we see represent directions. So we have the north, the east, the south, and the west. These are all different parts of Europe, and these are cities that are sort of in turmoil as the old War of the Princes sort of aristocratic structures are overthrown, and this is the birth of the Anarchs. So this is them sort of exploding onto the scene, and each one of these cities is up for grabs. It could go one way or the other, depending on the player choices. And the last thing from a theme point of view that I think is really neat is that when a character takes one of these Anks, there won't be cubes, of course, there'll be Anks. When a character takes one of them and we put the token on the character, it shows that they're defending the status quo. They're defending the sort of nascent Camarilla in that city. And that means that if somebody manages to stake that vampire and place them into torpor, it's going to push part of that city more towards the Anarchs.
Right, and we'll learn more about how all of that works in the next segment.
In Heritage, every turn, every player must recruit a character, adding them to their bloodline. When they do that, we're going to look at every one of that character's attributes. In this case, the Anarch Revolt, we are looking at the third attribute at the bottom, which is geographic, north, east, south, or west. And when we do that, adding the character into our bloodline, we have a choice to make about the Anarch Revolt in that city. So we look to the southern Anks, and that player can make a choice. They can either take the Ank onto the character, which represents the character supporting the vampiric status quo and the powers that be in the city, or they can take the Ank and they can throw it into the fire of the Anarch Revolt, which shows them supporting the new revolutionary forces.
So as characters get recruited and Anks get distributed either to the bloodlines or to the fire, there's an ongoing struggle between the Anarchs trying to burn the city and the status quo. And once the last of the Anks of a city is taken, there's a pause in the struggle, and those who supported the status quo will be rewarded by receiving power. And all of the Anks from these defenders of the city will be returned to the city, while those that are in the fire already will remain in the fire.
There are two powerful ways that we can influence this battleground. The first is if you manage to place one of these vampires who are defending the status quo into torpor, we're going to take that Ank from them and we're not going to return it to the city. We're going to throw it directly into the fire. So this is a very direct way to push a city in a certain direction. The other way is that you can activate the battleground scheme. Each battleground has a scheme. In this case, the coterie that we form, each coterie member is going to be activated on this battleground. So for the sire, which is the coterie leader, and their children, we look at the city that they're from, and they can choose to either support the city as a way of gaining more power and protecting this place, or they can move these Anks directly into the fire and support the Anarch Revolt.
So what does this mean for scoring at the end of the game? At the end of the game, we'll have a number of cities where all of the Anks have been placed in the fire, which represents the fact that the Anarch Revolt has won the power struggle in that city. And we'll have a number of cities that will have survived with at least 1 cube remaining on that city. And for scoring, this means that these cities, these colors that have survived, will gain as many points as there are cities that have been burned. So in this example here, black and blue would both be worth 2 points per character in each player's bloodline.
So, how do I win the Anarch Revolt? What are my secrets?
Have you ever won the Anarch Revolt, though?
I don't think so. So, like a lot of the battlegrounds, the first big choice to be made from a strategic point of view is how much to commit and how much risk to take for the greater reward. Because what you can do is recruit characters from various cities, particularly early in the game, when all of them are standing and you're not sure which ones will survive. So that gives you a fairly good chance of getting some points regardless of which cities remain. The alternative is that you can invest heavily in a color and try to score a lot of points out of that. Now that becomes a little bit tricky because the way that you actually increase the value of the region that you've invested in is by burning the others. So as the east and the south and the west become sort of overrun by the Anarchs, the one remaining bastion of the vampiric status quo is going to be worth, in this case, 3 points. That's difficult to do because you need to not necessarily recruit, well that's one way, but you need to activate characters from these other regions.
Right, and these characters that mostly you will have to recruit will not give you points because you're burning their city. So there's this delicate balancing act of, am I hurting myself more than I'm gaining from this action?
Yeah, multicolored vampires are a godsend there, right? Because you can recruit them from anywhere. They're going to be worth 1 point at the end of the game, so it doesn't feel too bad. And you can also activate them later using the battleground scheme, and usually people use that to cause damage.
Right. One thing I think is extremely important in the Anarch Revolt is to read the table as the game goes along and to see who wants to do what in this battleground. Because if there's a player who heavily invests into a single color early, you can punish them early, and that's certainly going to be worth it most of the time. If there's sort of like a situation where many people just defend the status quo, taking the power, that opens up more possibilities for you potentially. But you'll always have to be sneaky about it to some extent, because again, if someone sees you going for that one color, you'll not have your city survive until the end either. The interesting part about it, though, is that if your city is the only surviving city and you manage to actually get a bunch of characters from that city, you can get up to 3 points per character, which can be very powerful, even if you didn't gather like 7 or 8 characters of that color. Like 3, 4, 5 might be enough, depending on the relative difference between you and the next.
Can be very high scoring. And one way to maximize the number of characters you have from a region without having to invest in the others is to just go staking. If you're able to torpor the opponent, that allows you to put one of the Anks into the fires of the Anarch Revolt without having to mess up your bloodline with a character from that region. So that's very important as well.
One thing we should mention in regards to the Anarch Revolt is that, of course, what other battlegrounds in play are in play is also important. So if the Inquisition is in play and there's more ways to hunt other vampires and put them in torpor, obviously that gives you different options than if there are battlegrounds in play that are more self-contained.
Yeah, and the same goes for the clans. Like if there's a more aggressive clan, particularly clans who can sort of torpor almost at will, where they're not as restricted in who they're able to take down, that would give you a lot of control. Also, there's going to be a lot of power moving around in this battleground. So clans that can steal power or do tricky things with power become stronger as well.
The question that's always at the mind of the players when they see the battleground for the first time, which is, isn't it just best to defend the status quo, take the power, and be happy. And that can be very true, but everything depends on what everyone else does and how the game develops as you play.
So, thank you for watching. That has been the third era overview in our ongoing series. After this video, we'll be releasing one for each of the new battlegrounds that are coming out in the upcoming eras of Heritage. Until then, subscribe and
stay safe, wash your hands, and don't let this whole thing get you down. Bye.